Hello and welcome to the Genius Move audio podcast. My name is Paul Brewer. In this podcast, I'll chat to people who are professionally involved in the music business here in Ireland and abroad. Today's guest is Keith Anderson. Keith is tour manager currently working with Tori Amos. I met him in his hotel on the morning of the second Tori Olympia gig. Please excuse the sound of the phone buzzing, which was emails and messages constantly arriving for Keith. I started by asking him who actually employs him.
For the most part, it's word of mouth. I mean, the amount of times I've emailed resumes and people say, "Oh, thanks very much, I keep you on the list," and then you don't hear anything back. Most of the time, you're not getting responses. You end up in someone's inbox, and then more stuff gets on top, and you're forgotten about a week later. So most of it really is someone saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a tour manager. You got any suggestions?" And and that follows the conversation. Or you've built up relationships and you're getting callbacks. You're getting asked, "Hey, are you available to do this?"
Right, so that's repeat touring.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the situation you are at the moment.
Yeah. And I would say from a hirer's perspective, if you're a good hirer, manager or agent making recommendations, you're looking at someone's resume and seeing how many times they get called back for jobs. And if it's someone that's got 27 different bands on their resume and they never go back to the same one, you're kind of thinking, okay, what's going on there?
Right.
And you know what? We spend more time texting things that could be quicker answered in a phone call.
All right, okay.
Sometimes answers lead to other questions. So the employment thing generally is word of mouth.
Right. And is that across the industry, do you think?
Well, the internet world has enabled digital sources. But again, I find them to be the same.
What do you mean digital sources?
Well, or people starting websites that are like employment agencies where there's not so much job listings, but there's personnel listings. So someone starts up a website and they get a bunch of music business related ads and sponsors and stuff. The primary purpose of the website is to be a shop window for people that are working, whether they're wardrobe assistants, tour managers, tour accountants, guitar techs. And you can upload your information, you log in and fill it in. There was one guy who was a tour accountant who started this kind of like a MailChimp service where someone would ask him, "Oh, do you know anyone that can, do this tour? I'm looking for a drum tech." And he would make recommendations or he would pass on contact information. And his list of people expanded because people would say, "Oh, hey, I hear that you've got this.
Right, yeah.
Can you put me on it?" And then he expanded it to the point where it started to become this whole other workload.
Right, okay.
And then started charging a registration fee for it.
Okay.
And I paid it for a little while. But I think for the most part, if you're a manager or an agent, you're more likely that you know someone. If you're a manager, you know another manager and you ask.
Yeah.
Whereas for a tour manager who's running out of options or a production manager trying to find, a bass tech, those kind of resources are more helpful.
Right. After you're employed, what's your first job? Before the tour starts, what do you do?
Someone offers you a job. Okay. So then you need to know the main players. You need to be in contact with the booking agent, and then those personnel that might already be hired. They could be people that have been working with that particular artist for a long time. So the first thing is making that personal connection with the people that are involved. What ongoing relationships does that artist have with vendors? Whether it's a travel agent or a catering company or a PA company, a lighting company, and then either their ongoing relationships that you're going to honour, or they say, "Well, we used to work with this person, but we're happy to go with somebody else." So it's about initially connecting those relationships and being introduced to those people.
So would you have a list of lads who can step in, for those jobs?
If I was looking for people to fill specific roles, it's different horses for different courses. Somebody that may suit being a guitar tech on a tour might not be the personality or the level of experience for another tour. So Yeah, I mean, you keep certain people close to the top of your list, and it's not always about ability. It's often a consideration for the personality and then the capability. You know, I find it really interesting. You can see people. I worked with this guy who used to talk about the touring business being a bunch of circles, like little globes, and occasionally one bumps into the other, and you jump from one to another.
Yeah.
And you can see people. You know, you could be out on a tour, and you've got an opening act, and they've got someone working with them, and you can see that they've got the aptitude and the capability to keep progressing. And likewise, you could also be out there and you could bump into people on the level that you're working at, or maybe they're working on a high level. And you think, how the hell did that twit get that job?
Right, okay.
You know, what's the level of expectation? You know, and sometimes you hear it from musicians, and they're talking about other musicians, and they're thinking, how the hell did that person get that job? Why did that person accept that job at that pay rate when they really should be expecting to be remunerated on a much better scale than they're getting?
Like, back in our day, your ability to smile and be happy all the time is probably more valuable than your ability to change guitar strings
Right.
on a daily basis.
It's important.
Especially
yeah.
when there's, 20 people, or, what does the bus carry these days?
Well, you're on a crew bus, and in Europe, and it can be as many as 16.
Right, okay. 16 people on a bus.
Yeah.
You want to be a person who's in good form all the time, really.
You want to fit in.
Yeah.
And these days, you can't ignore the fact that there's a lot of polarizing stuff going on, and you only need one people with a completely alien outlook on life to everybody else for it to
disturb the
equilibrium. The apple cart, yeah.
After you've sort of established what companies are working with the artist, introduce yourself, fit into what's already there. What's the next step then?
Well, then you're getting into joining all the dots. And, I would often make the puzzle analogy. You've got this big picture and you've got a box full of parts, and you've got to put them all together. And once you've put them all together, you need to hang on to them and keep them all in place for 3 or 4 weeks or however long the tour's going to be. So, the three main things that you're going to start off with is obviously the production part of it, and dealing with any production related companies, and then the venues and the production people at the venues.
Which I guess you'd all know at this stage. Like on this tour, I presume you know
everybody. There's a lot of repeat ones where you go back in and you know people. So there's that side of it. There's the show side of it, and then there's also the moving things around. It's like travel agent and hotels and potentially flying, or the bus companies and moving people from A to B on a form of transport.
Is that a difficult part? Has it become more difficult now since COVID? Actually,
well, what makes it has made it more difficult, and it would be the same in an awful lot of industries that deal with freelance hires, is if the good people, or the people that you would deem to be good, couldn't surf that long wave of no work, and they went off and found other jobs.
Okay,
they're gone. And one of the big challenges, of course, in a business that involves transportation, if you run a trucking company or a bus company, it's a different work environment from being a bus driver that's going, say, from Dublin to Belfast or London to Manchester, and driving a day bus full of people. There's that aspect, and again, aptitude, ability, capability, and so for bus companies that maybe got a fleet of 100 buses, and along comes something as devastating to socializing as COVID, or any kind of pandemic, epidemic. The buses are sitting in the yard, going nowhere. All the drivers have laid off. Their route back to work is another driving job, and maybe they get to the point where that other driving job, over the course of the period that they've been away from what they were doing, they're not going back. So, you've got a bus company or a truck company that have got vehicles sitting in the yard with nowhere to go. Crew. And even on a smaller level, like wanting to go to a company and saying, hey, you guys rent out backline, you rent out vans. I need a van and a driver to move, a box of widgets from one point to another. And they're like, oh yeah, we don't do that anymore. We can't get any drivers. We sold off that part of the business. Or even complete companies that just had to shut down because there was no business for them. So then it makes it harder to source those kind of resources.
Is there sort of more demand on them now because most artists make money touring? The importance of touring is magnified because of the lack of income from selling records. Are people more inclined to tour now?
I think they are, and I think there's always been that part of playing music and recording and releasing music where people haven't made a sufficient income to sustain themselves and have been reliant upon touring. And in many ways, there are more that are doing that. But at the same time, I think there's also a misconception about financial aspect of touring. And yeah, there are some tours out there that are on the kind of budgets that can make a lot of money. But then there are also an awful lot of artists that are looking to supplement income when they're on the road to break even and maybe make a little profit. But it enables them to sustain during the year. So things like merchandise can become important, like a club or a small theatre level band that's on the road. And one of the unfortunate things now is there are so many fingers in the pie that impact those income opportunities for bands.
And are there new fingers in the pie?
Yeah, bands used to turn up at venues and they want to sell a bunch of T-shirts and it'd be, you can set your table up over there and we charge you 50 quid for putting the table up. And now we've got a lot of the influence of particularly American corporate mentalities, and we've got these big global corporations promoting shows that see all these revenue streams and are beholden to shareholders and big paychecks for certain executives, and they've got fingers in the pies. The only reason why merchandise for a fan at a show is so expensive is because there are percentages being charged that didn't exist 20, 25, 30 years ago.
So how much is a T-shirt these days?
Anywhere from like 25 quid, 30 quid, 40, 50 for long sleeve T-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies.
50 quid.
It's a lot of money for someone who might have spent 50 quid on a ticket.
And what percentage of that is given away then?
It can vary. Sometimes you'd be in a situation in a venue where there's a deal in place that the venue sells and they're charging maybe 15 or 20%. And then you need someone that's being paid to manage that. And all they're doing is counting stuff in, counting stuff out and dealing with the money. They're not always physically involved in the sales. And, for an artist that needs that extra income to help sustain their touring and their existence as a band, to be giving 20% away. And I would always say, you show me a venue where the band get 20% of the bar take, because 1,000 people wouldn't be in that venue buying beer or wine or whatever. If the band wasn't there, they'd either be at home watching the telly or they'd be down the pub. But I've yet to hear of a booking agent that's gone to a promoter and negotiated a 20% cut of the bar.
Are these sort of figures set in stone? Like, can you do anything with bargaining, or?
I think there's a lot of jousting that goes on these days more than ever. You look at some of the stories that we've seen recently in the news that have probably been bubbling under for a while, and we're eventually going to hit that point where there's all these fees that get added on. Going back to the way that concert promotion has become very much a corporate entity across the board. You've got to be on a very different level to not encounter that. It's extremely difficult with the amount of agreements that are in place for promoters that own or operate a venue to be able to route a tour and avoid that. So, you've got this little jousting game that's going to go on between artist managers and agents on one side having to deal with promoters, and how do they get the best out of each other. And it's a different kind of wary game than it ever was before.
How big does a band need to be then to tour and at least break even?
I don't think you have to be on any particular level big. You can break even and you can make a little money on whatever level you're at, depending upon what your expenses are. If you're out there and there's 3 of you in a band and your overheads are small and you're playing in smaller venues, you can make it work. And it just, you just multiply it going up. Once you get into, a bigger level and you want to, have nice buses and you've moved
stay in 5-star hotels
and stay in nice hotels. You've moved away from being in a splitter van and driving every day and staying in the cheaper establishments. Now you're on a bus. You want the consistency of carrying your own PA and lights. You're in bigger venues, and that means the income enables you to be able to afford to do that. So yeah, I think on any level you meet those same financial challenges, because if you win the pools and you buy a big house, it's going to cost you more money to keep the big house running. Your electricity's that 10-bedroom country mansion with the swimming pool than it was in the terraced house in Manchester, or Rathmine. So it's all relevant in that respect.
After you've assembled the crew, the band is rocking, the gigs are booked. Is that it? Is that's done? Hotels are booked and all that. All that sort of stuff is done. What's your sort of day-to-day life from that point onwards?
Once you get going, I mean, you're in a situation where you might be employed in a long touring cycle.
What's the longest tour you've ever done?
In a cycle, you can be out there doing stuff for a year or a little more than a year, and obviously there can be gaps in between legs of tours for different reasons, breaks for sanity or logistical breaks for moving gear around. But once you get started, you've moved out of the rehearsal phase and you're into doing shows. It's a long day. There's nothing at the least glamorous about it, and from a crew's perspective, you could be loading in at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, setting up in a particular order, staging, lampies, audio, backline, lunch, sound check, dinner, doors, showtime, and maybe they're not out until midnight on the bus, and then up and doing the same thing again. And on the artist side of it, you can be on a tour with some artists where they don't want to deal with the in and out of hotels every day. If you're on a small theatre tour, you could find yourself on a bus pulling a trailer of gear, and on a show day, you park up outside the gig. Everyone's using the showers in the venue, even artist and crew, and then you only see hotels on days off. Now, I don't mind doing that if it's someone I like to work with. Obviously, it's much more enjoyable to be out on a tour where you pull up outside a hotel at 9 o'clock in the morning, unload and go in, and maybe you get a little bit of breakfast. But inevitably you're out by 2 o'clock because you're going over to the venue and there's whatever prep needs to be done there from an artist's perspective. Or it's just you've reached that checkout point at a hotel because you've booked the hotel for the night before in order for you to get in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they've agreed to extend the checkout to 2 o'clock. And then off you go to the venue, and you're in, you join that mode that the crew are in, where everything's set up. So you've gone in there, and it's sound check time for the band, they're having their dinner, getting ready to play. On the other side of it, from a tour manager's point of view, all those things that you've been planning that you've got lined up, then you get like the fruition of them every day. So you're looking at tickets and guest lists and liaising with the people that are dealing with that. And then at some stage in the evening, you're going to start to be looking at the financial side of it and what the deal entails and agreeing the costs and working out how much money came in, how much money went out, each party accepting those numbers, signing off on it, and
continue on your way.
And off you go and do it again the next day.
So what is it, a 12-hour day?
14 or more.
14?
Easily, yeah.
And that's every day.
But if you think, like for me in this situation, if I wasn't coming out, sitting here talking to you on the second day of 2 shows in a row in the same venue, we might have pulled in here to this hotel at 9 o'clock this morning. By the time we get out of a venue, it's going to be midnight. There's inevitably that decompression period where you can't just walk out of a venue and get on a bus and go to bed. Some people in their roles push themselves to do that, but when you're up all day dealing with stuff, either you're going to sit and relax quietly and you're going to find a little corner on your own. Maybe you just sit and read the newspaper or a book, or you just sit and then the next thing you know, it's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Time for bed.
Yeah.
On the financial side, do you collect the cash? Is there cash? or is it all done banks and how does that work?
Just like people going for a cup of coffee these days, which I always find very odd to spend £3 on a cup of coffee and not put your hand in your pocket and pull a fiver out and get £2 back. There's a lot of stuff that's increasingly electronic. It is becoming increasingly harder on the road to deal with quantities of cash. In cash disbursements, I mean, obviously there's things that go on every day where you need to be spending money, replenishing stocks, making repairs, and those things where you would have previously been able to draw cash fairly easily are becoming increasingly limited. And there's this paranoia about money laundering that impacts the average person and their capability to collect cash. Meanwhile, all these big companies and all these rich people can get up to all sorts of dodgy stuff. So it becomes harder to pick up cash. There are a bunch, for example, of multi-currency digital online bank accounts you can get these days. So things like per diems that used to always be a cash thing. In some instances these days,
which are the payments that crew
get
for every day.
Bit of subsistence for travelling and having to deal with. You can't just brew up yourself. You've got to go and get a cup of coffee wherever, or your lunch or dinner on a day off. So that little subsistence payment, it is in some instances just rolled in and paid as a part of a paycheck, or
beforehand.
No, so on a week, whether you're paid on a weekly cycle, wired into your account, transferred, or whether you're paid on a 2 weekly cycle.
Right. So I seem to remember getting just one payment at the end.
Invoicing was often, 20, 30 years ago, you'd put in your invoice and get paid that way.
Yeah, and you get cash PDs.
And you'd be getting cash PDs along the way. It's often the case now, like a 2-week cycle and a payment's getting transferred into your account. If you're working on and you end up in two different situations. There are some people that your work relationship is such that you are an employee for the duration of the touring cycle, and there are others that are paid as self-employed freelancers, so they're putting in their invoices to get paid. But someone in my position where you're an employee and you're on the payroll and that money's going in, where we used to be picking up PDs, and you do on some tours, it can be an electronic transfer. Some tours where all the crew were previously used to getting their per diems in cash, they've now got a little card in their pocket and a digital bank account, and the money gets transferred to their digital bank account. So that's less cash on that side of it as well.
Right.
And maybe the only thing that you need cash for, and less cash because it's becoming harder to obtain, is for, everyday consumables that, all the little things that crop up, dry cleaning bills or going off to the laundry and feeding you. The digital aspect, especially in a world that moves in a work environment, is in many ways, it has changed the way you work, especially as a tour manager or a production manager that isn't only focused on what goes on in a venue with what they've just taken out of a flight case. That capability to be contactable the same way with an email address and a mobile phone enables you to work anywhere. I can sit in a hotel as I would do most days, having breakfast, and I can sit at breakfast, and between toast and marmalade and
the scrambled eggs,
I can be sitting there answering emails.
Does that increase your workload or reduce it, do you think?
It kind of spreads it out. In some ways, it's nice to be able to deal with stuff when you're sitting there and you've got the time to deal with it, rather than walking into 10 messages. Now, I think back, like when we toured together, we'd walk into a hotel and there might be 5 messages waiting for you when you pick your keys up. And you've got into the room, and if you're on a tight schedule and you've got these 5 phone calls to make. And I remember being on the road when buzzers came along before mobile phones.
Yes, I used to have one. Yeah.
I being on a tour and the buzzer going off, and I'm driving and pulling up at the next sensible opportunity, like P stop, having to buy petrol or whatever, and returning those calls. And there was one guy, one artist that was on the road, with one guy in a record company, I think he was in radio promotion, and he would say to me, "No one ever calls me back as quickly as you do." But it's taking that opportunity, and I like the fact that I could sit in a car between a hotel or on a bus between a hotel and a venue and deal with stuff rather than walk into a venue and there's all these questions lined up. So that part of it is really good. And the fact that I can sit in a hotel here and someone in Germany doesn't have to send me a fax. I can get that email and respond to them. I can phone them, because if I'm dealing with a promoter rep and we've got some stuff to go over, and they're on another tour that's moving every day.
So what's a promoter rep then?
Well, obviously a promoter is the one that's buying the show and getting into all the aspects of promoting the show and selling the tickets and dealing with the venue side of it and the ticketing.
So Eamon would be the promoter rep.
So someone like Eamon, for example,
who used to be is the drummer in Something Happens.
But Eamon, he's working for a promoter that's taking on all these shows and dealing with a whole other host of work aspects to put the show on. And for Eamon, he's the guy that's there on the day.
So Eamon would be your point of call all the time.
Yeah, and then he's going to be interfacing with people in the venue, technical side, box office, administration. And we could be dealing with a promoter rep that's on another tour. We go to Germany and we're doing, say, four or five shows, and we're going to have the same guy every day at all our shows. It works for the promoter, but he might be on another tour. Currently. And he's moving every day. So while we're in the UK, he's out there with whoever, with Tom Jones, and it's easier for him to communicate with me, because he's not in Frankfurt sending a fax to someone that's in Dublin today and who's going to be in Liverpool tomorrow, and he's going to be in Munich. Yeah. And the numbers are changing every day. And it's, oh, blimey, what? How do I get hold of him today? How do I send him this information?
Is all that sort of side simpler to organise now?
I think so. Tagging it as they do these days with the digital nomad, it's great. It's an absolute bonus to be able to deal with stuff in a more efficient way and not get bombarded, because there are some tours that there's not always as much local promotional things going on. But when there were, like tours that we've done in the US, when you've got an act that they're attempting to break and they want to do all this radio and all this press stuff.
And do you have that in the current tour, which is Tori Amos?
No, we don't have that on. A part of what we're doing now is stuff that's rescheduled because of COVID restrictions and because other things that we were doing.
When you got restricted by COVID, were there shows booked and tickets sold, or then?
Tori's manager will delight in the relief that the tour's finally happening.
Okay.
When you go back to planning stuff, any agent or manager that was working on a tour for one of their artists, and they were in the planning stage in 2019, and they were calling people up and saying, "Hey, what are you doing next year? We're going to start this tour in March. Or we're going to start this tour in September. And this is the routing that we're working on, and stuff's getting booked." And then all that gets booked, and you've got that period marked off in your calendar, and then you get the phone call, guess what? All this COVID stuff we're dealing with, it's too risky to think that we're going to get out on the road. And then, of course, being aware of the possibility, and then it becomes a reality. So you're talking about tours for anyone that was planning 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that got moved maybe 2 or 3 times. I had another tour that I ended up not being able to do that also ended up in the same boat, where we were all thinking spring 2022, we're going to be safe. And what are you going to do? You've got a tour, you've got to reschedule it. You can't just not do anything. So there were tours, and there were plenty of them that got rescheduled into a period where restrictions were being eased. But then you've got a tour in Europe that's going into, say, 10 countries, and each of those countries are opening up at a different rate. And while the movement aspect of people to and fro into work and their leisure activities and sports stadiums and all that stuff opening up for concert venues that was still subject to indoor restrictions. So you've got a concert room that maybe holds 2,000 people and someone's decided, okay, we're going to have 2 empty seats between each sold seat.
Yeah.
And you've got a tour that was booked and sold out. And they say, okay, so this place holds 2,100 people, but we can only put 700 in it. What 700 do you pick? And how does it become financially viable to go out and do that for the promoter versus cancelling? So then when you cancel and you've got 30 shows and you're not doing refunds, you don't want to do refunds because you want to honour the ticket on another date. You've got to try and take those 30 shows and move them in some kind of geographic symmetry where you can still go to Brussels and do that show and do the 2 shows that you were going to do in Amsterdam. So then you've got to find that point in Amsterdam where that venue has got 2 days available for you that fits in with everyone else. And you might have had to do that 2 or 3 times. So for us, we ended up last year going out and doing 6 shows because most of mainland Europe was still under restrictions, that the 2 or 3 cities in countries that we could have gone to were just too far apart to make it sensible to go out there and do it.
Yeah.
So here we are catching up with all the places that unfortunately we didn't get to go to. And the US tour that we did went very well and was selling out everywhere. So it was like, okay, so we're going to go out and do Europe again. We might as well do another run in the US while we're at it. So
when is the US one?
So we've got about a 6-week break. We finished this one in Zurich at the end of April, and then we start up again in the middle of June until the end of July.
How does Tori react to the pace of touring? Like, I mean, does she need breaks between gigs or?
The bigger breaks that we have between tours tend to be logistical ones because of freight and equipment around. That kind of requirement can change from artist to artist and what they've got moving around and the distances involved.
I take it she doesn't bring her own piano.
Oh, no, the piano goes everywhere.
Oh, so it's your own piano.
Big and heavy, yeah. And between continents, it will be freighted, and that could mean putting it in a sea container. But when it comes to shows, it's expensive.
And tuned every day, of course, as well.
Tuned every day twice.
Right.
Before the sound check, after the sound check, before the show, around about doors opening time. But, different artists do different things. I mean, some like to do one show at the beginning and then take a day off, pacing themselves rather than jumping in at the deep end and doing 3 in a row or 4 in a row. Sometimes between capability in terms of, particularly for singers, how many shows can you stand in a week? What do you need to be looking at from a budgetary point of view? Can the tour afford 3 days off in 7? Do you need to do 5? What's the most the singer can reasonably deal with it in a row? Is it 3 or 4? Before it starts to take its toll on the voice. So it really varies. And then, of course, the other great dictator is going to be venue availability for the type of venue that you want to go in. And none of it comes off like sliced bread,
Okay.
We started this tour in the Queen's Hall in Edinburgh, which is, it's an intimate venue in the...
Is it Olympia size?
In the space. It's a bit smaller than the Olympia, which is great because, for the artist and for the audience, you're a lot closer together. But it's also challenging getting equipment in there and when you're a tour that's sized with the production that's going to go into, 2,500, 3,000 capacity theatres.
The bulk of the gigs would be the bigger gigs.
Yeah.
So these sort of intro ones and just are smaller. Obviously, don't bring in the full production then.
No, you've got the old quart and a pint pot, and sometimes and understanding the realities and the economics of being on the road, you could be sitting looking at a situation where it's okay. Are we going to take this as a day off, and that day off means it's 24 hours of expense and no income, or do we do a show where we have to shrink down a little bit and go in a venue that otherwise we wouldn't have gone into because the type of room that we would prefer play isn't available.
So would you have had another choice in Dublin?
I think that the choice that was made was the right one, and to do 2 nights as well. I mean, the Olympia, as challenging as it is for a bigger tour, with unloading and setting up. It is, again, it's, the proximity for the artist and the audience and that feeling that you get. It's a great place to play. Versus what we see in a lot of cities is new build venues that don't necessarily have the atmosphere for a concert performance. So you could be, I don't know, like Peter Kay or one of those stand-up comedians, and you could go into a big venue, a big modern theatre or an arena, and people are going to laugh because you're funny. But there's a different kind of connection, I believe, between an audience and a performing artist, regardless of the style of music, that lends itself to certain kinds of theatres. So I don't think it works for some artists to be in particular types of venues. So you're juggling, as a manager that's focusing a lot of time and energy on where your artist is going to play and where is it suitable for your artist to play. It would be kind of daft to put a rap act on in the Olympia.
Yeah.
But they might be fine in the National Stadium.
Yeah.
And, the Board Gauche, if you were Celine Dion or something like that, Board Gosh.
Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah, sorry, I've got to practice my pronunciation. Yeah, there are artists that would be suitable to, in my opinion. I mean, I wouldn't.
Would you have any say in those sort of decisions? Does the tour manager job include things like that? Or is it just the knowledge you'd have of your opinion would be an educated one?
The sensible thing for smart managers to do, particularly ones that don't have a background in touring, is to work closely with not only the booking agent in routing and selecting venues and checking them out, but also to do that same due diligence with your tour manager and the production manager, talking about the travel part. Can we get from here to there? What's going to be involved? Can we fit in production wise? What's going to be involved? So sometimes you can be involved while the tour's being routed and venues are being selected. And you might get an email or a phone call say, hey, we've got an offer to play this particular venue. What do you think? Right. And sometimes you might have to defer to looking at the travel equation and, okay, we've been offered this fly date. How does it fit into a tour? What time a flight's scheduled on the days that we would need to move to be there? Can we physically get there? And if there are equipment requirements, can we get our equipment there?
Right.
So I've been involved in routing tours where you've got this offer and you'd love to go and play a particular place, but you just can't make it work in the schedule that you've got and the time that's unavailable. Yeah, you can be involved from the very beginning in some instances. And I have some relationships with managers where that would happen, and other times you're just being given okay, this is where we're going. I think it's like any job, it's all aptitude and ability. And
like, you are a very calm man, which is probably needed in your job.
I come from the perspective, and again, I talked about early on about, different abilities and the personality and what tours they fit into. And I certainly believe from what I've done, from my experience, that the last thing an artist wants that's got all this stuff that they're thinking about, their energy focused on putting on a good show. Those of us that are around an artist, it's our responsibility to create the best possible environment for them to put on the best possible show.
Yeah.
And the last thing an artist needs is to feel like a jelly in an earthquake, like, what the hell's going on here? Who's in charge? What's happening? And you do come across people who, to me, clearly show their lack of ability by running around shouting a lot. Having some semblance of understanding the psychology of what we do and why we do it. And we can all get into those situations where we get angry and you start letting off steam. But if you stop and think about why we do those kind of things, it's because you don't feel in control. It's the health psychologist thing, the therapy thing about, we often know what we feel, but we don't always know why we feel it.
Yeah.
And when I see or hear about tour managers or production managers that are running around shouting a lot, they either have a level of insecurity where they think that if they're shouting a lot,
they're being powerful. And,
yeah.
Okay.
It's the power thing. Or they're just so untogether and out of control that they've got wound up and they're getting angry about stuff.
But like, ultimately, you talk about being in control. You can't really be in control of a tour. So is that a valuable thing to have in your personality that you say, oh yeah, we'll work it out. And you will work it out. You will work it out. But it's not worked out now.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. The important part of that perspective is understanding that there is only so much you can control. There's no point in worrying about things that are outside your control. Be prepared to fix things.
Right.
To put fires out.
Okay.
Because they're going to happen.
Yeah.
We can't control the weather. You might have a fly date somewhere.
Yeah, that's the obvious thing.
And a crazy example, I was in South America a few years ago and we were flying from Santiago, Chile, across to Brazil, to Rio de Janeiro. The morning that we were leaving, there was a taxi driver strike and the taxi drivers were using their cars to block the exits to get to, and all the roads around the airport.
Of course, yeah.
It took us ages to get into the airport, and we knew we were going to miss the flight. I'm sitting in the vehicle taking us to the airport, communicating with the travel agent back in the US about changing tickets. So you're thinking on your feet, hitting the ground running, all those flaming catchphrases, and problem solving. And then you just got to say, you know what, this is the situation we're in. Running around with my hair on fire isn't going to change anything. We're going to have to sit here for 3 hours and get this other plane. But the good thing is we've got seats on this flight. We're going to get there. All the things that we might have been doing at the other end when we arrived have gone out the window. But we can't control that. And there's, you come across situations like that.
Yeah.
And you just have to deal with it. I another tour story. Leaving a venue in Park City in Utah in October, and waking up on the bus, sitting at the on-ramp of a highway going to Denver, because the police had closed the highway because it was snowing, and it was October. No one expected the snow in October, and the cops. We got into Denver so late. The show did happen, but of course the production vehicles in front of us had the same.
Of course, the gear couldn't arrive, yeah.
What are you going to do getting upset about it, worried about it, projecting that? And again, from the artist's point of view, just projecting that, look.
Yeah, you are the leader of the tour then.
We're going to fix it. And if we can't fix it, we have to accept the reasons why we can't fix it. And in my opinion, again, with things that I've seen and people that I've experienced, the artists that get upset the most, I think it's very understandable, because you imagine you're the one that's getting up on stage and has the potential to look a right twit.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. They're the ones taking the risk, as it were.
Yeah, and there are understandably times where you've ceded so much power and responsibility to other people. You need to have some semblance of trust and feel secure in the environment. And I don't mean securing that a nut job's not going to come up and throw a bucket of paint over you. I mean securing that in everyone's capability to get their job done, so you can get up on stage, because all day all you're thinking about is getting up and playing.
Right.
And what I would say as well is, obviously, my experience, our experience is music related, but you can also see the proliferation these days of other entertainment fields that are doing what we've done for years, in that comedians go out and do these big tours now.
Yeah.
And not just in their home countries, they're popular internationally and are traveling. And it's kind of shifted into sports. And someone was telling me the other day, here in Dublin recently, there's a tour that's been going around of 3 former professional football players that are selling out places like the Three Arena, and they sit on stage and they talk about their experiences together as a footballer, and they get into these little anecdotes about things that we wouldn't otherwise hear about. And
I saw one last night, actually. Is it Dave Robinson from Stiff?
Stiff Records.
Yeah, he's doing a stage tour.
If you're a plumber and you're 24, you're still a plumber when you're 64. It's what you know. It's what you do. I think it's totally understandable that there are bands from the 80s that are still going out and doing it.
Yeah.
Because what else are they going to do? If they can afford not to and they don't want to, fine. But if they still get a great enjoyment out of going out and playing,
Level 42,
they're going to do it. And there's a good example.
Yeah.
So and that, of course, when we talk about touring and work opportunities, has broadened the amount of tours that are going out.
Right.
Because they're not just the currently popular ones.
Yes.
There are people that have been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years. And at the same time, the audience has gone from
being a 20-year-old teeny bopper.
Yeah, maybe like 16, 17 to early 30s.
To losing your hair.
And people that would have stopped going to shows, and the whole, they've got kids, they've got houses, their focus has shifted. They're still going out to shows.
So has there a new audience been added to the potential audience?
I think the age range of audiences has got bigger, because if you're Bruce Springsteen and you're 74, chances are that the big proportion of your audience is somewhere
in their 60s,
not too far away, 55 and above. So I think the audience potential has grown. Like when we were kids,
the market is bigger then.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I was a kid, if my mum and dad went to a concert, it was Frank Sinatra or Tony Bennett once in a blue moon.
Right.
When something like that would happen. And there weren't that many artists touring, and the whole thing has grown, and we've got all these, much older acts. I mean, Elton John here, I think tonight in Dublin on his farewell tour, and he's in his early 70s. He's been playing live for 50 years. I would probably say that those kind of tours that are in the older theatres, where every day there's certain distinction about where you're at, and there's a presence, and you can feel a sense of history and the people that have passed through it are the most enjoyable ones. People in their 20s and 30s now that are the music fans that we were equally at that age, their experience of venues is different from ours.
Okay.
And I wouldn't necessarily say it was a better one. They probably don't think about it. Oh, yeah, we're going to go to the Bord Gosh and see a show, and they're not really...
Twice the Bord Gosh has been mentioned.
Yeah, and it's easy, isn't it? Because it's one of those big buildings in town that's new and modern, and it's a good example of, comparing chalk and cheese that is looking at the Olympia and looking at a building like that. And they just accept it, and they don't realise
the importance a venue can make.
They know what they feel in going into a building like that. They don't necessarily know why. Oh yeah, I really enjoyed that show last time when it was over there, and it wasn't so good in this one. And it's not necessarily anything to do with the artist, or the audience. It's about the ambience that the room gives off, and how people are going to enjoy themselves.
And the band as well, how they perform, I guess, could be affected as well. So they are, after all, humans.
Yeah.
So that's how Keith Anderson, tour manager, does it. Many thanks to him for taking the time out of his busy day to have a chat. Do visit geniusmove.ie to find out about recording courses to suit you. Thanks for listening.